Meet Sam. Just when he thinks he has gotten all the knowledge he needs to face life challenges, life hits him with the bitter truth. Sam has recently graduated from university and started his first full-time job not long ago. Luckily for Sam, he is among the few who wants to use their money wisely. Unfortunately, Sam doesn't know how to. No one taught him about tax, pensions, or investing. At school, and all the jargon and numbers are confusing. He doesn't know where to begin. Sam remembered something old Tom said to him years ago. Old Tom lived up the street from Sam's childhood home and seemed to just sit around all day. Old Tom had told Sam to invest wisely while you're still young. It's either you do that or inherit this chair when I'm gone, old Tom would say. Sam decided not to end up like old Tom. First thing first, he needed to learn more about money. He Googles financial planners in his area. There were so many. The more expensive ones wanted him to pay hundreds in fees, with some wanting him to have $50,000 to invest just to get an appointment. Even the cheaper ones were too expensive. And besides that, how was he going to tell if they were even any good? Why didn't his professors make financial education compulsory for all in school? How can something so vital to people, especially the youth, and yet ignored by all? He had heard his parents discussing with friends how they had been given bad advice from someone charging a lot of commission, and now they were worried about their retirement. Sam decided he needed to understand all this financial planning stuff for himself, so he could take control. But now he just had to work out how. Then Sam remembered Dave, a friend he had met at his sports club. He had given Sam some great advice while he was trying to figure out how to get a job, and Sam liked to think of Dave as a finance wizard. Dave must have read 1 million books on the subject. Or maybe not 1 million, but I bet it was up to 1 million words. And Sam was on his way to visit finance wizard Dave. Sam again wondered why he didn't learn more about financial planning at school. On arrival, Sam asked how he could become a finance wizard too. Dave chuckled. "There is no wizardry," he said. "Like magicians, a lot is just an illusion. People like to use complicated jargon to justify high charges." Dave smiled at Sam with a twinkle in his eye and said, "Sam, let's start a finance romance, shall we? So let's start with the basics. There are really only 4 places your money can go. You can pay taxes, you can pay off debt, you can invest it, or you can spend it now. Let's break down each of those a bit further. Taxes. The government wants us to pay taxes, as it helps pay for all the things that everyone uses. It also means that the most fortunate can help out the less fortunate. That made sense to smart Sam, and he was happy to contribute. The tax authority, called the HMRC, collects taxes for the government. They want us to pay taxes, so they actually make it quite easy, explained Dave. For a lot of people, their tax is paid by their employer, and they don't actually need to worry about doing anything else. Dave explained that Sam would only need to submit a tax return each year if certain conditions were met. Luckily, Sam did not need to do this for this year. "Sam," said Dave, "you really want to avoid having debt. It stills your future. Debt used to pay for assets and education may be a bit different if it's used wisely, but a rule of thumb is that if you need to borrow, you will be left in sorrow." "Okay," said Sam, "but I already have some debt. What should I do?" "That can be taken care of," said Dave. "As long as your debt is still manageable, we can create a plan to pay it off quickly." Sam did a quick list of what he owed and found that it was actually a little more than what he thought. They worked out that if he paid off the debt that had the highest interest rate first, he could save over half of his interest payments and get out of debt quicker, without paying more each month. The next thing to discuss was investing. Dave looked at Sam a bit more intently. "Sam," he said, "starting investing while you are young is probably the smartest decision you can make. For all the terminology, there is likely only to be 4 things you can do. The first thing you need to do is to start investing early. There is something powerful called compound interest." Sam had heard of it, but wasn't sure he fully understood. Dave explained that compound interest is basically building interest on interest. Einstein is quoted as saying, "Compound interest is the 8th wonder of the world. He who understands it earns it. He who doesn't pays it." Dave could see the importance wasn't sinking in. He stopped and then said, "Sam, let's put it this way. Let's take an investment of $10,000. If you invest it when you're 25 and get a 7% interest, it will be worth $150,000 when you are 65. If you waited until 35 and then invested it, it would be worth 76,000. If you waited another 10 years, it would only be worth 39,000. At 55, it would be worth 20,000. So really, it is a question of if you want your original 10,000 to be worth 150,000 or 20,000 when you retire. Sam's eyes lit up. He knew he needed to start now. It's like a snowball being rolled downhill, he thought. Dave was happy that Sam was realizing the value of starting early. Even with an amount as low as £20 per month, the snowball would become quite large. Sam said he was already saving a bit into a savings account, getting 2.3% interest. Dave asked Sam how much he thought that he would get at 65. Sam was pretty good at math, so he realized that 2.3% was roughly 1/3 of 7%. So he took a guess, saying 50,000, a third of 150,000. Then Dave shocked Sam, showing him that it's actually more like 25,000, half of Sam's 50,000 guess, and much lower than 150,000. Sam realized time and interest had a big effect. Dave then went through the second thing that could be done. Reducing fees and taxes can have a massive effect. Let's take an example of 3% fees to a fund manager, someone who is actively investing your money for you. Sam thought that sounded like a reasonable amount given the importance. Dave then shocked Sam. With a 3% fee, that 150,000 would only be 44,000. Very few fund managers could justify that high fee, and it was almost impossible to tell or get access to those which do. Reducing taxes was just as powerful and could be done through a pension and investment ISA. Thirdly, Dave went on to explain about how investing in a variety of types of investments and companies would be a safer way to invest. Through something called index funds, Sam would be able to invest a little bit in a lot of companies, which sounded great as he didn't know which ones would do well. They finished with the fourth thing he could do, which was something called rebalancing, which was basically once a year selling investments that had done well and buying ones that had done badly. Or another way to say it, sell high, buy low. Sam, while starting to get more confidence in his understanding, tentatively said, I should probably start now and invest in low-fee index funds through something which is tax-friendly. Sam was starting to understand. Dave smiled and quoted Warren Buffett. The goal of the non-professional should not be to pick winners. Neither he nor his helpers can do that, but should rather be to own a cross-section of businesses that in aggregate are bound to do well. A low-cost S&P index fund will achieve this goal. He also quoted someone called David Swensen. When you look at the results of an after-fee, after-tax basis over reasonably long periods of time, there's almost no chance that you end up beating the index fund. Sam made a note to Google Buffett and Swensen when he got home. Dave suggested he add Dalio to that list. Sam decided that he would set up a monthly payment that he would invest, which would automatically be paid the day after payday. He also decided that once his debt was paid off, he would increase the amount invested. Finance wizard Dave then brought up the fourth place Sam's money could go. Spending. Budgeting, thought Sam with a grimace on his face. Sam didn't see the point. It takes too long to do, and he wasn't likely to stick to it anyway. Dave saw the grimace and said, Don't worry, we are not going to budget. Dave, as he suspected Sam's feelings on the matter, said, Not budgeting, at least not in a typical way. Rather what I like to call it a conscious spending plan. Sam looked quizzical. So the goal was to spend? Well, not quite, responded Dave. The goal is to spend on the things you really value over the things you don't. So, Sam and Dave went through some of Sam's monthly expenses. The first thing they found was that Sam could reduce his mobile contract by $10 per month. From one with unlimited texts, calls and data to one that had 100 minutes, 100 texts, but still had unlimited data. Sam couldn't remember the last time he made a call longer than 5 minutes, and Dave suggested he put that saving towards paying off his debt faster. Sam agreed. This was sensible. The next thing they found was Sam had a fee-paying bank account that he didn't really gain any of the benefits. This cost $15 per month. The bank had changed this from his old free student account. They decided he would get more value out of the $5 per month account. Sam tried to preempt Dave. I know, I should pay off my debt sooner. Dave smiled. He knew Sam was starting to get it, but he was confident Sam would soon have paid off his debt and something else had caught his attention. Dave asked Sam about his gym membership and how often he went. Sam said he tried to go 3 times a week, but usually it was once at most, as it took 20 minutes to get there, so he would often struggle to fit it in with other things he liked to do. Dave asked Sam why he didn't go to the gym right next to his work. "Well, it's $10 more expensive and I'm trying to save money." Then something twigged and Sam exclaimed, "I could use a saving from my cheaper bank account and go to the better, more expensive gym and actually use it. Spending $25 at a gym he didn't use was a waste. Spending $35 on one he did was not. A conscious spending plan." They started discussing Sam's commute, and Sam mentioned that he got a coffee on the way to work every day, but that it was only a couple of bucks. Dave saw another opportunity for a lesson. He knew how much Sam earned and did a quick calculation. "So Sam," he said, "you're working 48 hours a year to pay for that coffee. I'm not saying you shouldn't enjoy it if it's something you value, but know what it's worth to you." Sam thought about it and realized he just drank the coffee out of habit. Instead, he decided he'd buy a drip filter coffee machine for $10 and make his own. Sam also thought that he would enjoy the ritual each morning of taking a few minutes to make his coffee. The working out this would save over $400 per year. Dave knew Sam had a passion for rock climbing, so he suggested that he should put his savings into a separate bank account called Lifestyle Fund and set up an automated payment. With the savings, he'd go on climbing trips in Europe every summer, something he never thought he could have afforded on his salary. Sam thanked Dave and realized this finance stuff wasn't as tough as he once thought. He wondered what all the fuss was about. He knew, while he understood a lot more, some of it would take a while to fully sink in, but that was okay. He was taking the first important few steps. Sam and Dave agreed to meet up again for a more in-depth look at each area and bring it all together into a manageable plan.